Okay. Yeah, we're fine. The light is a little bit. Is it? So, good afternoon. It's 5:30, second session of the DNSOP working group. This is Suzanne, I'm Benno, and Tim is remote. We are the chairs. Our AD is in front, is Warren, and our scribe, note taker, Paul, thank you very much, over there. Right, next slide. So this is an IETF working group session. So the note well applies here. Be aware, be knowledgeable about what is in the note well. Part of the, apologies, part of the note well is the code of conduct. You see here a number of bullet points. And the short summary is be kind and respectful to each other. We all work together. If there are any, well, if you think people don't behave according to the code of conduct or the guidelines, please inform us directly. These are the meeting tips. In person, please use your telephone or the on-site tool to register. These are also the blue sheets. And I run into some people that are recent, have no idea what the blue sheets are. So maybe we should come up back with the blue sheets, just with the quad code. So it's maybe a nice tradition, something for the next time. But please use the on-site registration because it's important. It's also
It's how we keep track. It's how we keep track of attendance,
yeah,
and how we make sure that we're managing the queue fairly.
yeah. And also it goes back to the note well. So our contributions here are part of the IETF activities, and it's good to have blue sheets. Good for remote participants. Make the tool of choice, the on-site telephone one or the full video, but make sure your microphone is switched off. Good. So the agenda for this afternoon, we have 4 presentations for consideration. So in the first session, we always do the DNSOP working group documents, and then that's our priority, and for more, then we go to the for consideration documents. We have a number of time considering documents. We put them in agenda, but we don't have time for presentation today, but please look at the slides if they are provided, read the drafts, and sorry, well, something is running. Right, okay, back to the agenda. Apologies. Good, yeah, for the time permitting, we don't have time for presentations of these documents today, but take a note of the documents, and discussions on the mailing list are encouraged. Good, for consideration, we open in a minute with the integration of DNS, domain names draft. We have the extended DNS error codes from Stefan. Then we have a presentation by the .internal private use by Kim Davies, and we conclude with upper limit values for DNS by Fujiwara-san. I want to come back to the opening slides of Monday. I lost count, sorry. So it was Monday. We incorrectly said, now I'm lost. I don't know what's going on here. We incorrectly said that the 2 documents by Johan Stenstam were for ISE. That's not correct. There's another document. That's our fault. So we're planning an interim, maybe late December, but we already synced with Johan. That might be difficult to plan. So probably early 25, we'll organize an interim with these 2 documents and maybe something more, in everything in context, so we can discuss that in depth. That said, apologies, Johan, and we plan further forward. Then I want to give the word to Suzanne. So I'm not, please go ahead.
So for anybody who wasn't in the plenary yesterday, our very own long-term contributor to DNS and DNS operations, Steve Crocker, was awarded the Jonathan B. Postel Service Award yesterday. That's a very prestigious award from the Internet Society, and his work over the years on DNS, and particularly DNSSEC, is one of the achievements that's credit for, that built his history, and it led to that selection. So if Steve's here, I'm not going to make him stand up, but congratulations, Steve Crocker. And I think this puts some pressure on the rest of us.
And he made a confession, but that can only repeat it over there. So you have to ask him what his confession was. So up next is Andrew. You will give the presentation. Yeah, excellent. You can run themselves with the clicker.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Kaiser of VeriSign, joined in person by my colleague Swapnil Sheth and remotely by one of our co-authors, Brian Newbold of Blue Sky. And today we would like to talk with you about our draft integration of DNS domain names into application environments, motivations and considerations.
Oh, okay.
Next slide.
Yeah. It's a little bit.
Oh, maybe. All right, so a natural first question might be, what are DNS integrations? In this draft, we define DNS integrations as how a DNS domain name is enabled for use as an identifier in an application environment. And application environments can be many things. Common ones that we are all no doubt familiar with would include things like email clients and web browsers. But in the last few years, exciting new use cases for domain names have started to arise, including through the use of artificial intelligence.
No, yeah, apologies. I don't know what.
Applications like artificial intelligence, blockchain applications, decentralized protocols, and even social media. But it's not just the use of domain names.
Sorry for this.
Oh, no.
Am I at the right slide now?
Oh, back one more.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. It's not just DNS integrations that we want to talk about, but responsible DNS integrations. And a responsible integration is something that takes into account the qualities and the considerations that provide a consistent user experience in the global DNS today, and can extend those same qualities of security, stability, and resiliency to these applications that are providing DNS integrations. Now, why is this important? Well, because if an application doesn't provide a responsible DNS integration, we may have inadvertent name collisions, user confusion, and other complications.
I know there's some magic going on here.
So the draft's goal is really to give high-level guidance to applications that want to provide DNS integrations, ideas that they should be considering. The draft is informational in nature. It is not meant to be, at this time, a bits on the wire document, but to provide these high-level guidelines. And some examples that you may have seen us, if you've seen our previous presentations, include things like what we did at the Center Jamboree, where we presented on how Blue Sky uses DNS domain names as a social media handle, and we'll hear more about that from our co-author in just a minute. The Ethereum name service has a couple DNSSEC-based integrations that allows users to use their domain names for digital wallet use cases, or something like Microsoft's GitHub, which uses domain control validation to allow users to link a domain name to a GitHub organization. Next slide, please.
No, it's fine. No, thank you. You just leave out the clicker.
So at this time, the draft is really broken up into two different sections, motivations and challenges or considerations. The motivations primarily come from our co-authors who provide DNS integrations or other applications that provide DNS integrations that we've talked to, and are primarily the reasons that they decided to use DNS domain names in their application environment. This includes things such as global consistency of the global DNS with the single root source, and of course, verifiability through something like using DNSSEC. However, there are plenty of challenges that we wanted to account for as well, and this gets to the nature of providing a generalized checklist. The idea here is that an application who wants to provide a DNS integration can look at challenges such as these and make sure that they are accounted for them when they provide their integration to avoid complications related to inadvertent name collisions and things of that nature. Just as a high-level example here, something like the domain name lifecycle, often what we see is that applications do a pretty good job of the initial step of linking a domain name to something in their application state, but they may not be aware that the domain name could be deleted, transferred, or resource records may change. So just being aware of that can help applications know that they should do something to handle those use cases. Now, at this time, I'd like to hand it over to our co-author, Brian Newbold of Blue Sky, so he can explain their use of domain names and support of this draft.
Yeah. Let's see what I need to do.
Yeah, you should be able to.
That's not me. Yeah, it's not unmuted here. One moment.
Yeah, you should be able to just turn on his microphone. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Should be able to talk.
Yeah, try again.
Try again, Brian.
Yeah. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah. See.
Okay.
Brian, I think we're gonna skip ahead here. Yeah, unfortunately, but Brian Newbold of Blue Sky is one of our draft's co-authors. They're an application that provides a DNS integration using DNS domain names as social media handles on the Blue Sky social media platform, like what you see circled in orange on the slide here. And last time I checked, I'm sure this number has gone up. Blue Sky has over 13.5 million DNS domain names integrated into their platform, and they are actively taking into account many of these considerations to ensure things remain synchronized and aligned with the global DNS. Next slide, please.
Yes.
The other co-author we have, who could also unfortunately not join us here today, is the Ethereum name service and their digital wallets use case. But something through our communication with them that they've expressed is that they've had this integration evolve over the last several years, and they've had to encounter many of these challenges on their own, and they believe it would be useful to provide upfront guidance to future applications so they can avoid some of the pitfalls that they had in their early integrations. Next slide, please. So where does that leave our draft, and what did we hope to achieve here today? Well, what we really want are additional reviews and feedback. We got some great feedback after IETF 120 that we've incorporated into version 2 of the draft. We're still accounting for some of that feedback for soon to come version 3, but we would love to see more feedback. We know that our list of considerations and motivations and challenges is not exhaustive, but any feedback we get can help us improve this draft and better position it for applications that want to provide DNS integrations. And ultimately, we are looking to have this draft adopted by a working group, and we believe that DNSOP would be the ideal place to do so. DNSOP has the highest chance of providing valuable feedback about DNS edge cases that applications should be accounted for when they interface with the DNS. And we already know that many application communities that provide DNS integrations are interested in some sort of guidance on this topic, including our co-authors from Blue Sky and ENS, but also many other applications that we've talked to in the past as we try to understand their applications and use cases. So we look forward to hearing your feedback and additional next steps. Thanks for your time.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah, we have a couple minutes.
yeah. Okay, let's
If
leave
anybody
it
has-
at this slide. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. See Paul in the queue. Please come ahead.
Paul Hoffman, really briefly, I support adoption of this by the working group, partially because we've already got the other document on what is supposed to be using the DNS for short-term validation. And as we heard the other day, there's a lot of contention about whether that's short-term or not. This draft actually covers, I think, fairly well the life cycle question. So even if you're like, ew, Blue Sky, ew, don't care, you know, like whatever, I think that we know that there are many things that want to use DNS names. And if we don't tell them things like names get transferred, names expired, names get transferred after they're expired, and usually they're picked up quickly by someone who wants to do something bad. I think that that would be actually super useful for people who are thinking of doing, and by the way, I cringe at the word integration. I don't have a better one. But so I think this is a valuable thing for the working group to work on so that we the people who know what life cycle issues are, can instantiate them. Thanks.
Thank you. Wes?
Thank you, Wes Hardiker, ISI. I mean, you already know that I support the draft because I gave you a lot of comments on it, and thanks for integrating them. To me, this is a critical issue. I have a student that is actually looking at some blockchain DNS-related interactions at the moment. Will probably evolve into a larger project that I'm looking forward to take on, and it's scary. And I think, as Paul just said, if we don't explain how to do things properly, then people will miss, you know, we need some deep thinking to make sure that integration can happen in an intelligent way. You know, the flip side is we can't make people follow it, but the best we can do is document, you know, this is what we think if you want to be a responsible party.
Thank you. Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Campling. Two comments, I guess. Really, it would be fantastic if, on one of the earlier slides, I can't remember which one, so it doesn't matter, if it included something about respecting any sort of DNS settings on the endpoint, rather than an application making its own decisions irrespective of what the user may have preferred. Just my opinion. On the sort of the blockchain point, I'm sort of a blockchain skeptic, but nevertheless, I think it's valid to share learnings from 40 years of DNS so that people don't make the same mistakes all over again, because that would seem pretty stupid to not extend that help where it's applicable. So I think it's a good idea.
And Andrew, if you could make that first comment on the mailing list so that we can account for it in our version 3 document, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. So I do hear support for the document. We always take that to the mailing list. So we will schedule a working group call for adoption after the IETF. First in the personal communication, how to schedule with other activities. I hope you were not too nervous about my or about the technical hiccups, and apologies to Brian that didn't work out. But thank you.
All right, thank you.
Up next is Stefan.
Hello, I'm Stefan Bortsmeyer from FNIC. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
There will be many next because of the way they are built.
There we go.
Okay, so you all know about extended DNS error code. So next. It's really deployed. You can find a lot of resolvers in the wild sending back eDNS error code. So this is something that is actually used. Next. And the RFC has a very good and comprehensive list of error code, but you can add more with the policy first come, first serve, which means that I don't even need, I could stop here my talk because I don't even need to write a draft. I can just go to IANA and ask for more error codes, but next. Several were added this way. For instance, there is a code 29 synthesized for things like aggressive synthesis from NX domain cache. Next. So my proposal, I still wrote a draft because I wanted to have some input from the working group. Next. Is to add 3 codes which are completely unrelated. There, I've made only one draft because it was simpler. One to say that the answer was depending on the ECS data sent by the resolver, one that the response was minimized, and one to say that the resolver used a local route. Next. So there is not in the RFC 8914 a lot of guidance about new error codes. So for instance, next, it's not clear if you have to choose between codes which are very specific to one very precise thing or very general, very broadly applicable. Next. So for instance, a code for minimum response, does it have to be limited to the case of RFC 8482 when you reply to any query with a hrefs, or can we extend it to, for instance, glue omitted because there was a minimum response yes in the configuration of the server? Another example, next, is when we have a response which has been tailored to a specific query, is it only for ECS or is it also the case when there is, for instance, using geolocation on the IP address of the resolver to give a different answer? So this is the point where I wish some input from the working group. Next. And the problem is not, when you have to choose between specific and general error code, it's not a problem of a lack of available code points. We have a lot of possible eDNS error code. It's more on the consumer side of this code, because my concern personally would be that if we have many, many very specific error code, then people will have trouble figuring out what they mean, and it increase the chance that a bad code is used. Next. So about the process, so because the policy is first come, first served, we don't need a specification, but next. Maybe the working group has some opinion about whether it would be a good idea to have an internet draft. That is one. Maybe a RFC individual, maybe a working group RFC. In that case, if you have opinion about adoption by the working group, it's not legally necessary, but maybe some people find that it would be cool. Next. And last.
This last.
Okay, your turn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Warren's first in the queue.
So Warren Kamari, bunch of thoughts. Firstly, I think we intentionally left it kind of open as to how specific these should be. That way people could figure it out as they went along. I can't remember what my second point was because it's Thursday. But on, oh yeah, I don't see much value in the local root thing. The general idea is these will be consumed by humans for debugging and similar. And I don't think that's a particularly useful thing to know. It also just makes the packet bigger. For the last point, there's a lot of ongoing discussion in the ISG at the moment on whether or not it's appropriate for an internet draft to be referenced as something in a registry, because they might expire or something, and it's not appropriate to refer to an internet draft as anything other than work in progress, and they're supposed to. So like the internet draft might not be a great answer, but that's still something that's being discussed, and there's no real true guidance yet. I personally think it's fine, but
In the current registry, you don't even need that. For instance, 29 was registered. It's the only reference is a post on a mailing list, not an IETF mailing list, an external mailing list.
And yeah, I mean, to me, it seems a little bit crazy, but a lot of people think that that's more reasonable than referring to an internet draft, because the internet draft actually says that they expire after 6 months. And I realize you don't need to have it. You could just stick it on a mailing list. You could stick it on your personal website. That could change at any time. I believe it's likely that it will end up being that an internet draft is perfectly fine to refer to, but just noting there is some discussion at the moment.
Yeah, good point. Wes?
Wes Hardiker, primarily with my author of the ED draft hat on. We did discuss both of these topics, when it was being written, and revisiting those topics is always a good thing if we think that we got it wrong. But with regards to the two of them, we didn't specify how generic something had to be, because one of the goals was, in some cases, we wanted it to be very specific so that people knew exactly what was the problem. And so it was up to the specification defining a code to say, this is what the code means, and whether they say it's a generic error or whether it's specific is subject to the author of the code, essentially, or the working group, if that may be. With respect to whether it should be first come or first serve, I think it went around quite a while, and we ended up getting first come first serve because there's so many code points, and why not do it that way? I mean, you are right that if an implementation is supporting one, then it should be following guidance somewhere. It might be its own guidance. If it wanted it, it might be something, but if it's undocumented, then nobody's going to understand it anyway. So it doesn't really hurt necessarily to get a code you don't understand, because you don't want to do anything about it because it's undocumented. That being said, that seems like a silly practice to undertake. But there's not really a pain point with that many code points unless we actually run out of codes, which I hope we don't get to that point.
Hello, Peter van Dijk, Power DNS. On the previous slide, you said these things only cost 2 bytes each. That's assuming no text is added. And unless you invent enough sufficiently specific points, in many cases, text.
I was not referring to the size of the packet, but to the number of codes that you can register.
Oh.
So
right,
the risk of frivolous registrations taking all the space.
Right.
Roy Adams for ICANN. Not for ICANN, I work with it. Local root, I think that's a very good idea. So I support that. In terms of having a draft or an RFC, it's good to have a document anyway. Right? I think it's good form to have a reference in the registry. There are still drafts with my name out there from 2003. Those were really, really, really bad ideas, and to my shame, they're still referenced. So you can. It doesn't really matter what you put in the registry. The drafts you will find it. But it's good to have a document there to begin with. As for a specific or generic code point, it is what it is. Pick a generic one, and if someone thinks that the one you picked also applies to them, they can be more specific in the description, or they can then apply for their own one. And my last note, and I'm not speaking for ICANN or for IANA, but I do know there's some discretion by IANA. It's not just a garbage can where you can throw new code points, otherwise someone comes in tomorrow and allocates all 64K. So there's some discretion on IANA's side to deal with bulk registrations of error code. Cheers. Thanks.
Roy, hold on. Roy? Hold on a second. Do you have a preference as to whether that would be a working group draft or an individual?
I don't have a preference. I think the working group is busy enough. There's no need to have a working group draft for this. Also, the policy around this that we've created, all of us, in extended DNS error code says you don't need one. So I would just say document it. If you're unsure about quality, ask your peers, and let's move forward.
Thank you. Peter?
Petr Špaček, SC. with my implementer hat on, the guidance for me before I allocate a code would be to speak to some other implementation to see whether we agree on what the code means, and only then allocate it. I mean, there is no point in going and allocating like 500 codes, very fine grade, if no one is going to implement them. So I would say speak first to at least 2 different, preferably more, implementations. And then if they say, okay, this is a good idea, we can actually implement it, then go on and take the code and get it patched. But I think that there is no point in allocating codes without having the implementers actually agreeing that they will do it, because it's just wasting bits in the registry, and it just confuses people. If there are codes which are not used, it's completely useless. It's creating confusion, not helping anyone. So talk to implementations first, and then I think just like GitHub issue or whatever is good enough to document what it means.
Good idea.
Yeah. Okay, Puneet? Oh, sorry. Remote?
Yeah.
Puneet?
Yeah. Hi, Puneet here from Google. I think a couple of comments. One around the codes. I'll just remind ourselves that there is the reserved for private use section. Maybe if we are unclear, start there, and if people like it, move it, get a real code allocated. That may be one path to go down for that. And there's a specific question, comment I have on the ECS EDE. It's not clear to me how that's providing additional information over and above the ECS option anyways, because the RFC says that if you're using the responses targeted, you anyway have to put the ECS option in the response. Thank you.
Okay, Giancarlo? Sorry, Gianpolo.
Gianpaolo Scalone, Vodafone. I think a better approach could be to be more generic on this side and use the structured DNS errors to add more details so that customers could be more aware about the reason with the proper explanation without having a proliferation of specific error codes.
Okay. And I guess next up.
Thank you, Stefan. And up next is Kim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Davies from IANA, and I wanted to talk to you about a draft I've co-written with my ICANN colleague, Andrew McConaughey, on .internal. Next slide, please. So the .internal domain has been formally designated by ICANN essentially for private use. It's done this by making a commitment that it will never delegate this domain in the root zone. There's no risk that it will resolve by querying the root zone. Essentially, it's not specified much beyond that. It's simply an open space available for any network administrator or operator to use as they see fit for private use. It's use at your own risk. It doesn't come with any other particular guarantees about how to use it. Essentially, it's very similar to RFC 1918 address space, which means that there will be multiple parallel uses of it globally. There's definitely a risk of collision if you try to use it beyond your own local private use. There's potential for leakage. It's going to appear in log files. It's going to appear probably in email headers and all sorts of places where it will get into the outside world. Next slide, please. So we've written an internet draft. Really, our goal here is simply to memorialize this as being reserved for this purpose. RFC is attractive because it's an easily citable form to do so. It enables us to promote awareness of this designation for this purpose. And I think particularly it's very consistent with 1918, 4193, 6996. All of these RFCs designate private use namespaces, address spaces in a similar manner. But since we're writing a document, we go a little bit further than just simply stating its purpose. We also have a little bit of language in there explaining how this differs from .local, .alt, and a couple of other namespaces that might seem superficially similar if you didn't know the purposes of each of them. We also have some information about why you may or may not want to use .internal for your application. Next slide. So bringing in this here to the group, really primarily to look for review and feedback on the document. We're not necessarily looking for it to be a working group item. That said, if the working group felt it should be a working group item, we're open to that too. Really just trying to get awareness and some kind of reference for this available to promote awareness. I will note that .internal is decided. The actual label itself is no longer up for debate. That decision has already been made, so this is not the document to litigate any changes on that front. IANA recently has published a number of RFCs, usually under the IAB stream because we're an activity overseen by the IAB, but that hasn't been discussed as to whether this document would be appropriate for that. And lastly, I just wanted to note that it's not, according to this document, requesting that it be a special use domain name. There's no suggestion that resolvers or any DNS software treat this differently from any other label. But there might be other opinions on that, and we're welcome to hear it. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
But we've got quite a queue.
I really would like to see this in the root as in the same fashion as we do for RFC 1918, where we delegate it to servers which only return NX domain. RFC 1918, it breaks the DNSSEC chain of trust using the RFC 112 servers, AS 112 servers. Using internal without formally breaking the chain of trust at a delegation point means that every resolver in the world that uses internal has to add a negative trust anchor just to have DNSSEC work. We've done this too many times. .onion should have had the similar sort of thing, where we actually had a formal formal delegation for it in the root, so that DNSSEC trust chains are broken. IANA has a habit of not putting these breaks in. There's quite a few zones which should have it and don't. And there's a whole list, there's a whole registry where it's incomplete. And I've given up trying to get IANA to actually do what they've been instructed to do there.
Thanks, Mark. And I think you're right. We have had similar questions to this before, but they do need to be resolved sort of case by case. Who's next? Peter, please.
Peter Spacek, ISC. I have an opinion on the special use name, and I think because you've explicitly said that it's basically RFC 1980, but for a name, I think that we should follow exactly the same logic, and we have special use names for RFC 1980. So let's do that for internal as well. We will get better caching and less leakage to the root because the resolvers will stop it the same way as they do for the private IP addresses.
And Jim?
Jim Reeds. Whenever I heard people talking about special use domain names and TLDs in this context, I feel that running away screaming and jumping into the Liffey. I don't think we should have anything to do with this at all. Kim, it's good that the IANA has published this document and with some guidance and an ICANN setting. I think that's fine because it's more of a policy matter. I think the IETF should keep well away from that cesspit because we've got all these other things kind of like .onion, .alt, .whatever. I think we just need to keep that stuff away from the IETF altogether. If it's a policy matter, go through the ICANN machinery, publish it there. This is guidance to the ICANN community as a whole, but keep this away from the IETF. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Kempling, much more mundane. Commentary question. You're putting it through the ISE track, so you just plan it to be an informational document, not a standard track document then?
That was our initial starting assumption, but again, happy to explore alternatives if it was felt it was warranted. But our purpose in writing this draft was essentially to create awareness of it, and we felt RFC was a very appropriate way to do so.
Lehman.
Lars Lehmann, NetNode. Thank you for documenting it. That's an important thing, I think. But you're not getting off the hook that easy. I think the document needs more content. It needs to address what the root server operators, how they should meet this, and what resolver operators are expected to do, and also if we're, as suggested by someone, if we're going to do a delegation of it or not. We need an analysis of that, and we need to come up with a recommendation, and that might even have to be a BCP, because we probably need people to implement things, if not in code, at least in tables of local handling of things. So I think we might even want to make this a track somewhere that leads to a BCP. I don't know quite which way I would suggest, but not just mentioning it, that's a little too little. I think we need more, and I disagree with Jim. I think we definitely should handle this in the IETF, because it's a matter that relates to operations of the DNS. Thank you.
Yeah, just in response, I think that if there's an expectation of DNS behavior being modified by operators or elsewhere, then we definitely need more text, and it might need a different status.
Dwayne Muscles from Verisign. I also just want to voice support that I think this should be a special use domain name. It would seem really strange to me that we have these sort of its cousins like localhost and all these other ones that are special use domain names, and this one is not. I would find that very strange.
Warren?
Warren Kamari without any hats. I was just responding to something that Mark Andrews had said. IANA has not been asked to put it in the root yet, or reserve it or anything. So it's not IANA has not done their job here or failed. Just note.
Thank you.
And this chair, at least, no hats, but well, I guess so. Procedurally, the thing to think about when we're considering whether to adopt a document as a working group draft is what's the benefit to that? What content in the document would benefit from having the working group go through it and build a version that has working group consensus? If it's just describing something in the world that we don't necessarily have anything to say that would affect it, maybe it needs to be an ISE document. But in any case, thinking through that is probably something we should be doing.
Check us again. Can we get a special use name without working group document? I think I'd. Okay, then it doesn't matter. Paul Hoffman says yes.
Lars Lehmann again. My thought behind suggesting to make it a BCP is to give it more weight, so that you can actually tell operators that this is something that you should do, because we've arrived after deliberation here that this is a good thing to do. Thanks.
So, thank you, Kim. Thank you, DNS participants, for the input and guidance. So that brings us to the last presentation, Fujiwara-san, on the DNS limits.
Hello, this is Kazunori Fujiwara from JPRS. I proposed upper limit values for DNS. Next slide, please. Yes. This is a problem statement. Some parameters in DNS don't have clear upper limits. For example, number of resource records in an RR set. and number of RR-seq DNS key DS RRs in an RR set, and number of NS resource record GRU records, and number of CNAME DNAME chains, number of level of unrelated only delegations, and DNS packet size. Without upper limits, it is easy to attack DNS aimed at resource depletion or DOS. Just prepare long CNAME chains, large RR sets in a zone. And similar attack methods have been reported. For example, key trap to name several DOS attacks. This draft proposes reasonable upper limit for DNS protocols, and intended status is best current practice or update DNS standards. Next slide, please. These are possible upper limit items. And next slide, please. Packet size limits. There were comments that there are size limitations even if no precise upper limits is set. DNS packet format has an upper limit of 65,535 octets. So an RR set cannot exceed the size. But attackers use this size to carry out resource wasting attacks. The size of DNS response that can be sent using unfragmented UDP is about 1400 octets. See avoid fragmentation draft. The size 1400 may be a good limit of an RR set plus RR6 plus DNS header plus question section if we use UDP. Next slide, please. Number of resource records in RR set. Best current practice documents should allow for values that are currently in widespread use. Since there are 13 root name servers and 13 name servers for COM and net DLDs, the maximum number of NSRR in an NSR set should be larger than or equal to 13. Bind9 introduced the max records per type parameter, and the default is 100. And then I'd like to propose number of resource records in our set is smaller than or equal to 13. Next slide, please. And DNS key DS RRC case. Key trap is vulnerability caused by the fact that there is no upper limit on the number of DNS key DS or RRC RRs. Considering DNS key rollover and the multi-signer model, the maximum number of DNS keys may be 6 because signer 1 KSKZSK, new KSKZSK plus signer 2 KSKZSK. And then maximum number of DS is 3 because 3 KSKs. And do we need to consider multiple digest types? And Unbound introduced the maximum number of RR-seq validations for an RR set. Max validate RR6 as 8. But my preference is 2. It is my preference. And DNS key RR-seq may be 3. Next slide, please. Number of alias levels using CNAME DNAME. Many resolver implementations can handle over 10 CNAME aliases. Unbound introduced the max query restarts parameter, and the default is 11. This is the hard limit on the number of times Unbound is allowed to restart a query upon encountering a CNAME record. And my preference is 1. However, there are many domain names that use 2 or 3 CNAME chains. Next slide, please. Unrelated only delegation levels. Unrelated name server names are required for DNS hosting services, For example, IETF.org name servers are kenjil.ns cloudflare.com. However, using unrelated name server names increases the name resolution cost and may increase the likelihood of name resolution errors. To avoid complex name resolution and misconfigurations, it is better to avoid using unrelated name server names as much as possible. This draft proposes to use in-domain name servers as much as possible for name resolution of unrelated name server names. I propose that unrelated name server names should be hosted by a domain name with at least one in-domain name server name. In other words, DNS provider should have at least one in-domain name server name for their domain names. Cloudflare.com's name server are nsx.cloudflare.com in domain only. Excellent. Next slide, please. These are proposed upper limits. DNS message size and these are proposed message and proposed upper limits, and recursive resolvers should respond with a name resolution error, server failure if they receive responses from authoritative servers that exceeds these limits. And we need to consider exceed DNS errors. Next slide, please. This draft proposes aggressive upper limits to advance discussions on determining upper limit values in DNS protocol. And please review. And I would like to know implementers' comments and working draft co-authors. That's all.
Thank you. Roy, please go ahead.
Roy Adams, ICANN. The DNS have many limits. You're absolutely correct. Some of them are explicit, but seems arbitrary. They're not a technical limit on the amount of characters in the domain name. Once someone chose once 255. Theoretically, you could have 300, but it's 255. However, that one is explicit. And you're absolutely correct. There are many of them that are not explicit. They're implicit. So what I would suggest is document first the missing limits. Then second, have a discussion with implementers of what they currently implement. Also, try to find out why operators use things that seem close to the limit, and then eventually standardize on a set of limits. But I think this is a very good idea. It does remind me of yesterday's Pecha Kucha by Wes Hardaker about must. He had a fantastic graph up there. I know it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do like it. He had a graph up there that the amount of must capitalized, completely capitalized in documents has gone up, right, in the last couple of years over time, where the stability and resilience also has gone up in the last couple of years. So in order to get things more stable, more capital must. Take that with a grain of salt, but I thought it was a nice presentation. But yeah, we need limits. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Question to Wes. Actually, are the Pekka Kucha presentations, then you can't retrieve them, I guess, but they're secretive.
They were recorded. They will be usually posted to attendees or something in a couple of weeks. They don't go to YouTube like everything else, but they are on a website.
Okay, thank you. We're looking forward. Tobias.
Are they a formal part of the decision-making process? Anyway, Tobias Siebig, Max Planck Institute for Informatics. I have two things. One, I'm cautioning a bit against standardizing upper limits, despite liking the idea quite a lot to figure out what breaks when. And the reason for that is, for example, the limits in SPF on the maximum number of lookups, which were overtaken by reality. And now the lift practice is
roughly twice of what is said in the draft as a maximum. And if you just conform to what is written, you will actually run into problems. So I see that difficulty. And I heard the comment that it would be nice to measure what actually breaks. I have roughly 90 terabytes of DNS data, which tries to resolve everything, like full tree exploration. And we could like chat and look into whether we can actually simulate what each of these restrictions does to the DNS.
Okay, thank you. So what I just heard about the SPF is kind of the risk of ossification, or not really, but you set limits and actually reality goes beyond that.
So in SPF, there is, I think, a 10 empty lookup limit for SPF rules, because they can have like these folded structures. And due especially to the like cloud hosters and shared email hosters that have like these huge include lists, in practice, this
Right.
is
Oh
going
yeah,
more
I've seen it.
towards
Yeah.
20.
Yeah, I've seen examples indeed. Thanks. Yeah.
Stefan Dorsmeyer, AFNIC. I agree with the numerical limits and the idea of numerical limits and more or less about the values, but the part about in-domain name servers, having the name servers named in the domain they serve, I'm not sure I agree, and moreover, I don't think it's really related to the question of upper limits to prevent denial of service attacks. So I would suggest to remove this part, maybe in a separate draft, because it's unrelated.
Remote, Puneet?
Yeah, hi. Puneet Sood from Google. Hi, Fujiwara-san. Thank you for putting the work into this to identify the kind of parameters which can cause problems for the operators. So I have mixed feelings here. While I agree in principle with what we're trying to do, similar to what Tobias talked about for mail SPF related records, I have a concern about how do we keep the limits up to date as the real world changes, whether we have to dial down or dial up. I worry we end up with the same kind of procedural issues we have with recommending new DNSSEC algorithms, deprecating old ones and all. Then we keep coming back to this group or some other forum asking for people to agree to changing limits and all that. We end up with that cycle. To me, this seems very much like a more practical thing to be done rather than something which needs to be encoded in an RFC. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes. Just a heads up. Sorry, Peter.
Peter Spacek, SC. I want to comment on what Stefan said, and the name of the name server is very relevant because there has to be some sort of limit on number of packets or requests in general generated by the recursive resolver. And if you go overboard and the NS name has like 128 labels in like completely unrelated domain, and you have query name minimization and so on, it will just explode. So it is definitely in scope, because the name of the name server also affects the amount of work the resolver has to do.
Andre?
Hi, this is Andre IC. I'm the poor guy who has to implement the DNS. I'm in favor of this, even though we might not honor all the limits that are in the draft ever. We might pick our own, but this is very useful for the DNS implementers to have an RFC with the limits, because we can, if people complain, oh, you have this and that limit, we can go and point them to an authoritative document that this was agreed in the DNS community, that some limits are needed, and even though we might have a different limit. So I don't see it that important to be able to update the limits or agree on all of them, but it's a good thing to have some conservative limits documented somewhere.
Okay.
So
I guess Wes gets the last word.
Wes Herdiger, probably with my IAB hat on. Do remember that, so I think we need to have a conversation about each of these. I think that you've brought up a lot of important considerations. Do remember that, so I would support it as a BCP about how to deploy the DNS on the internet. Protocols are not limited to just one location. They're used inside of networks that may not be subject to the same set of problems. We also have to be careful about the transports, right? Large packets over TCP aren't as much of a problem. So trying to figure out how to write it in such a way that it's future-proof against future transports and other types of network deployments could be a problem. So a BCP for how we should do it today is probably a good idea.
Thanks, Wes. And what I think I'm hearing is definitely more discussion. People do want to think about this a little bit more, so please do go ahead and continue the discussion on the mailing list. Anything else?
No, we can close.
We are done. Thanks for attending both meetings this week. Thanks for all your time and energy. And we will see you on the mailing list and at the next IETF.
Can I use this mic?
Yeah.
If anyone in the room is interested in discussing crazy ideas how to develop a protocol for DNS traceroute or equivalent of sorts, find me here and we can have a dinner and discuss crazy ideas, draw on napkins and stuff like that.
I can highly recommend Peter for crazy ideas. So please find him. Big room.
All right.
Beautiful in time.
I'm sorry?
Beautiful in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Hi, hi. You have a question for the Gilbert?